I want to invite us to put two nearby special occasions into conversation. Yesterday, I'm sure you all celebrated this abundantly. Yesterday was the 253rd anniversary of John Murray preaching the first major Universalist sermon on this continent. Actually is really significant. September 30th, 1770. And Wednesday will be the feast of St. Francis of Assisi, the patron saint of animals and the environment. Both occasions, for reasons we'll explore, are deeply resonant with the Universalist half of our Unitarian Universalist heritage. If you've been hanging around in UU circles for a while, that name John Murray may be quite familiar for the uninitiated. Murray was the most influential leader among the first generation of Universalists, and then Hosea Ballou kind of took over. When Murray preached that first Universalist sermon, we were about 6 years before the founding of this country. And at that time, fire and brimstone sermons were common. But Murray really set himself apart by preaching sermons centered on hope and courage and kindness and love. Our Universalist forebears were preaching this message that was radical in their day: universal salvation for all people. They rejected this pessimistic Calvinist theology which taught that we humans are tainted by birth with original sin. They said, what about original blessing? What are all the good things we can do? So instead of being tainted by birth with original sin and some people being, or even most people being predestined to hell for eternity, except for an elite few. They preached this good news of early Universalism that a loving God would never punish people eternally, infinitely, for at most a finite number of sins on this earth. The old joke at that time in our UU history is that our Universalist forebears, they deeply believed that God was too good to damn people to hell forever. Our Unitarian forebears believed that they were too good to be damned forever. So, if that gives you a sense of our Universalist forebears were more of the people and our Unitarian forebears were more like Boston Brahmins. There's that saying that early Unitarianism was about the brotherhood, was about the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, and the neighborhood of Boston. So they all went to Harvard anyway. We don't have time for all that. More than 200 years later, here in the early 21st century, most of us don't have the same worries about hell, one way or the other, predestination, these things that really preoccupied some of our forebears in the 18th century. But the really interesting part and why it's significant that our Universalist half of our heritage is still with us in our name is that the same spirit of love that motivated our, in the 1700s, our forebears to widen their circle of compassion, that's still with us today, and it's continued to evolve and to remain relevant in a new age. Most crucially, if you study our Universalist history, you'll see the focus of Universalism, it inverted. It used to be about a concern of rejecting hell in the next world, and it inverted to what we call loving the hell out of this world, right? A bold proclamation in the 18th century of a universal salvation for all people that has evolved into many of our Universalist activists becoming activists for universal freedom, for the abolition of slavery in the 1900s. Do you get that same sort of, instead of saving people from hell, universal salvation, that's the same thing that said, let's love the hell out of this world. Let's get rid of enslavement. Like it's the same thing. It led to the same impulse, led to getting many of our Universalists get involved in the universal suffrage movement, right? The right for women, or at least white women at first, to have the right to vote in the 20th century. It's the same impulse led so many of us to be involved in universal marriage rights for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender citizens of this country in the 21st century. Can you see at the heart of each of those movements, it's the same Universalist impulse to widen our circles of care and compassion and inclusion. And if you've been following the current proposal, which it'll go one way or the other this coming June at UU General Assembly, this potential paradigm shift from having 7 UU principles, we have 8 here at the congregational level, but still at the national level, there are 7 UU principles, shifting that to 7 values. But do you see what's at the center? Love is at the center, and that's deeply related to our Universalist heritage. In the words of the proposed new covenantal language, quote, love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. And do you see also the colors, how the warmer colors are at top, the cooler colors? There's a lot to say about this graphic, actually. Looking to the future, a full-fledged universalism in the 21st century, so it's good to cheer what our ancestors did, but I actually think it's the same impulse potentially in the future that might lead us to actually achieve universal health care, universal child care, universal access to education through college, universal basic income. I really want you to see that it's the same thing that began with that universal salvation and then inverted to loving the hell out of this world. We're raised up on the shoulders of giants, these ancestors who helped shift history toward greater universal freedom and equality. And now it's our turn to discover, do we have the fortitude to bequeath to future generations a better world than the one we inherited, as our forebears did for us? And as we've begun to trace, the Universalist half of our UU heritage has this ever-expanding reverence and connection to all of life, all living beings, and coming to understand that more fully and what that really means and requires. And this brings us to the first of the two major points I want us to consider. From the perspective of our Universalist heritage, I was challenged by a recent book to consider that if you press me, I don't actually think I can tell you what life is. It's kind of one of those things like I know it when I see it, but I'm not really sure what it is. I feel deeply connected to what our UU seventh principle calls that interdependent web of life, but I don't know that I could give you a precise definition. So that made me curious to read this book, Life's Edge, The Search for What It Means to Be Alive. It's by Carl Zimmer. He teaches science writing at this little school called Yale, you may have heard of. He's won the American Association for the Advancement of Science Journalism Award 3 times. So this book first caught my attention. It was named one of the New York Times top 100 books of the year. And it's written almost like this mystery suspense thriller, trying to get to the, as through the ages as we've tried to answer this question, what is life? So check it out if this sermon leaves you curious to learn more. For myself, and you can think about your own relationship to this question of what is life, your own relationship to science, and being raised in a theologically conservative Christian context, the religion of my childhood taught me that humans were this uniquely special creation, that we were intended to be superior to the rest of creation and meant to dominate the other creatures and this planet. That, after all, the planet's going to be destroyed soon in a biblical apocalypse to make room for a new heaven and a new earth. Climate change, well, that just sounds like the apocalypse anyway, whatever. But after Darwin, we know that we humans are not a little lower than the angels. We're just a little higher than the apes. And we're deeply interconnected with our fellow life forms and the rest of the environment. And what I'm getting to is that although mystical experiences that I've had through Buddhist meditation and other sources, that has profoundly influenced my sense of connection and interdependence with the world. But it's also true for me, and I suspect for a number of you as well, that science has also deeply influenced the way that I understand universalism and how I experience our place as humans as deeply interdependent with the other branches on the tree of life. So let's get into it. What does modern science tell us about so-called life's edge, where kind of life begins? Let's start by getting the elephant in the room out of the way in our current struggle over reproductive justice in this country. The first question some folks will think of regarding life's edge is, when does human life begin? What we find is that this predicament called life, none of us asked to be here, right? But that we find ourselves in, it's a lot more complicated and a lot more interesting than is often realized. You've no doubt heard that simplistic argument that human life begins as soon as a sperm meets an egg. But if you remember way back to high school biology, that's erasing quite a few steps that still need to happen to really have a new genome. I was going to go into all that, but I don't know if it's worth our time. I think what I really want to get to that I think is more interesting is that, because all that's really pretty basic, regarding the search for life these days, consider that scientists have turned the skin cells of mice into mouse embryos. Skin cells into mouse embryos that grew into those mouse pups. They took mouse skin cells and made those mouse pups and many others. It may soon be possible to do the same with humans, and when that happens, trillions of cells in each of our bodies will gain the potential to become a human being. The dust in our homes is largely made up of the skin cells that we slough off by millions. Is each a potential lost life? How do we think about this, right? Zimmer's point is that finding life's edge has always been a gray area and will only become more so with scientific advancements. Or even though we're still a few months away from Easter Sunday, it's been fascinating for me. I don't know if any of you, I get the journal Science, so I read that. It comes out about once a week. But it's been fascinating to see the word resurrection bandied about in serious ways by biologists. Now, not about Jesus, mind you, but about the natural world. Some of you may have been following what we're learning about tardigrades and nematodes and rotifers that can dry up and then come back to life. The more these researchers study these animals, the longer it seems they can survive in limbo and still be able to return to the world of the living. So what does that tell us about life's edge? Tardigrades, for example, nicknamed water bears, they're a phylum of microanimals first discovered in 1773. To take just a brief detour, phylum, right? So some of you will remember domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, right? So when we're talking phylum, we're pretty far up there. So there are lots of varieties of these tardigrades. That's the main point here. Some of you, Star Trek Discovery, anybody? Tardigrades? All right. We're not going to go into that, but my Trekkies know what's up. So this particular phylum is really interesting. In the 1950s, a team of scientists collected dried tardigrades and put them in cold storage. 30 years later, in the 1980s, they warmed them up, gave them a little water, and they were suddenly back to normal health. That's wild, you know? So like, what is life that can happen? Or nematodes. Nematodes are also a phylum. They're a phylum of roundworms. Right? Not really. In a similar dynamic to tardigrades, nematodes have been returned to life from these lifeless fibers after more than 3 decades. And it just keeps going with there. We could go into related discoveries in recent years with flies, with fungi, with bacteria and other species. I'll give you just 2 other quick examples. In Antarctica, glaciers retreated to reveal moss that had been dried out and frozen for at least 600 years. With just a little tender gardening, it produced new green sprouts. It's wild. Or in Siberia, scientists came across burrows dug by Ice Age squirrels 30,000 years ago that contained dried out bits of a flower called a narrow-leafed campion. The scientists nurtured the fragments, which grew into healthy new plants that produced seeds of their own. 30,000 years ago. And like, thanks, Ice Age. You know? So all this is to say is that life and death and everywhere in between is really quite a wild and fascinating frontier waiting to be explored further. So what is the best response scientists have come up to, to date to this question? What is life? I have to be honest that the examples that I've shared with you are likely to be more satisfying. The answers I'm about to share are going to be more satisfying to the more scientifically inclined among you, but you can let me know afterwards. So here's a little more than a century ago. Here's one influential definition of life from a Czech scientist. This is from 1911. He said, "On the whole, what we call life is nothing else but a complex of innumerable chemical reactions in the living substance that we call protoplasm. Life is just the play of water." I kind of like that, especially the last part. You've got a PhD in chemistry, right? So you can talk to Bob later about some of this. Here's a few more recent ones from leading scientists. Life is an expected, collectively self-organized property of catalytic polymers. Here's 2 more. Life is a new quality brought upon an organic chemical system by a dialectic change resulting from an increase in the quantity of complexity in the system. Life is a monophyletic clade. A clade is a group of organisms. Life is a monophyletic clade that originated with the last common universal ancestor and includes all its descendants. Or here's the perhaps most frank and pragmatic one. Life is what the scientific establishment, after some healthy disagreement, will accept as life. There are many more competing definitions of life in modern science. I'll move now to just one 3-word definition. This is from a scientist who reviewed the 123 top definitions and concluded the following 3 words are what all the definitions had in common: that life is self-reproduction with variation. I don't know. Yeah. Giddy up. All right. So, what do you think? Are you impressed or more meh? The truth is that modern scientists have not yet reached a satisfactory consensus around what life is. But the search continues, and if the journey so far is any indication, especially some of the nematodes and the moths, some of these, examples, if the journey so far is any indication, the quest to understand the nature of what it means to be alive is going to have some further mind-blowing twists ahead. It turns out in some ways that science is best at answering how and not why, right? So I want to add in a little more on the why, the meaning piece that Bob spoke to. So to deepen our reflection on life's edge and our universalist challenge to keep widening our circles of care and concern as we come to understand what it means to be connected more fully to all of life, I just want to weave in a quick final point around the upcoming feast of St. Francis of Assisi. This is just one why. There are others we could do, but this is one that's important, the patron saint of both animals and the environment. And to me, all of this is deeply interrelated and interdependent, all of this that we're talking about this morning. And in the spirit of universalism that we have been tracing, part of what it means to be alive is to realize that we are deeply part of this universal tree of life. You can see that's humans up there on the top right. It's a little hard to read, like Derail in the shark suit. So that's humans up there in the top right. We are literally kin. I think that's the important part. We are literally kin to all other life on this planet. We are all part of the same family. We came from the same common ancestor. We may have branched off, a long time ago, but we're all deeply related. And our challenge is to consider how to stay together in right relationship to our fellow human beings who find ourselves together. As Dr. King used to say, we're in this world house together, and we're either going to learn to live together as siblings or we will perish together as fools. It's unclear what's going to happen, right? The title of Dr. King's final book was, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, right? Which one is it? We're striving for beloved community. It's not clear what's going to happen. Other people are really trying to sow chaos. That's another sermon. Around the time of the Feast of St. Francis, we also spent a little time reflecting on the animal rights movement. So I want to leave you with one final book recommendation. It was published just last month by our own Beacon Press, owned by the Unitarian Universalist Association. It's titled No Meat Required: The Cultural History and Culinary Future of Plant-Based Eating by Alicia Kennedy, a prominent food writer and culture critic. As we reflect on the amazing fact that life exists and how we're interrelated on this tree of life, it's an important reminder, Kennedy's book is, that our current human food system is a major cause of global warming, which is a threat to life and biodiversity on this planet. Approximately 21 to 37% of total greenhouse gas emissions comes from our current food system. And part of what I appreciate most about Kennedy's book is she's done a lot of research into the history of plant-based diets in many diverse cultures around the world. It's not just white hippies, man, right? Not that there's anything wrong with that. But it's also important to remember that a plant-based diet is also very traditional. Hunter-gatherer societies did hunt animals, but mostly they ate plants, right? Animals were kind of this rarer thing. Looking to the future and how we might work for more climate justice and food justice and animal rights, I also appreciate Kennedy's pragmatism. Many of you will know I've been a vegetarian for almost 30 years now. I eat eggs and dairy. I was vegan temporarily, but although Kennedy and I both have huge respect for veganism, and if you're interested in veganism, members of our UU Animal Rights Network would love to talk to you about that and how to do that in a fun, healthy way. She actually is now an ex-vegan, and I want to share just a little about why. Her current view is the best way to support local ecosystems and economies does include a role for animals and working with animals toward a common stewardship of the land. That being said, she is certainly also a strong proponent of eating far less meat than the typical U.S. diet, as well as lowering both animal cruelty and our carbon footprint by eating a primarily plant-based diet. Strategically, she's come to believe that it is the conscientious omnivore who seeks to eat increasingly less meat and increasingly ethically grown and raised food that is our best ally in destroying industrial animal farming. and really transforming our relationship to the land. So I offer that framework as we consider all of our right relationship to the larger tree of life. So maybe some of you will identify as conscientious omnivores. I'll end for now by emphasizing that as a longtime vegetarian who lives in downtown Frederick, the good news is that a plant-based diet can be delicious and it's easier than ever. Some of you will remember that a few years ago, PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, declared Frederick number 3 on its top 10 vegan-friendly small cities in the US. If you're curious, Asheville got the gold and Dayton, Ohio got the silver. But bronze is pretty impressive, right? So we won for having some exclusively vegan restaurants as well as a high percentage of other restaurants with substantive vegan options. So when we seek to center life and love and universalism, it's vital to emphasize that the better world we dream about, it is not one of denial and austerity and lack. It's one of abundance and sharing. In Kennedy's world, the movement for food justice and animal rights seeks to form a new world, an abundant one, a caring one, a delicious one, right? She puts it this way as she seeks to build the better world we dream about. She says that for tonight, I'm going to set aside some of the activism, I'm going to rest, and I'm going to make some mushroom pate. I'm going to brown the minced mushrooms in olive oil in my cast iron pan. I'm going to deglaze them in a fine sherry, and then I'm going to spread the finished product on a toasted baguette. I'll have a passion fruit or two for dessert. She lives in Puerto Rico. She says that I'm going to hope and work for a better future, for more, for everyone. In that spirit, I invite you to rise, embody your spirit. Let's sing together hymn number 6, Just as Long as I Have Breath.